Hello, and welcome to Marriage and Money, a conversational podcast about personal financial topics aimed at improving conversations about money in your marriage so you can reach your dreams together. This is a weekly discussion brought to you by a seemingly financially incompatible couple bonded by the legal contract of marriage. My name is David, your favorite saver, and I am joined by my sugar mama, Heather.
Here's $20. Why don't you go pick out something nice for yourself?
How generous of you. Oh, what would I do without you?
Just kidding.
Well, as usual, we have another great show for you planned today. Today, we're going to be talking about managing the dynamics of different incomes. So income disparity in marriage.
That sounds kind of negative. Disparity, but
well, differences.
I know.
We're talking about differences, not despair. So it doesn't have to be despair. It shouldn't be despair for people. And I hope this isn't despair for people, because I think this is something that most couples deal with at some level or another. So granted, most couples don't make exactly to the penny the same amount. There's always someone that makes at least one penny more.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, this has got to be very common. It'd be completely crazy that people are making the same amount, even if you're both working, right? So someone is always probably making more money.
Right.
Or, you can be the traditional path where one spouse is staying at home and not bringing in an income. Or even a little bit more non-traditional is that spouse is the husband, which is becoming more and more common, which I love.
So you love that husbands aren't making money. Is that what I'm hearing?
Not my husband, but
so you wish I wasn't making money.
I think it's good that we're challenging.
I guess maybe I should quit my job. That's what I'm hearing.
Just like it's becoming more common that the woman is making more money, I think it's great that the woman has the option to be the professional or make more money. It's also okay if the dad wants to stay at home and take care of the family. I think it's great.
Yeah, definitely. I think we each need, I think the important piece here is that people need to play to their strengths, and we need to be comfortable with that. But I think this can ultimately cause some arguments, or it can create some tension in a marriage because it could be that one spouse comes from a background where either both people brought in income and now one of them isn't bringing in income, or one spouse brought in, maybe traditionally the man brought in more money than the woman, and now they're having to work through that as well, and that could cause some tension.
Right. Well, I think this is a very common situation. I would also be shocked if people told me this was not an issue or something they had to work through in their marriage. I would not believe them. I would challenge that because I agree with you. I think this is hard, and I think especially a lot of times in men, it could become an ego issue, if the woman's making more, or anyway, there's a lot of issues I think that could arise with this, which is why it's very common that there's going to probably be this issue, whether you're both working or one of you isn't working, but it is something that you're going to have to work through as a couple.
And I think it's important for us to talk about this today, because this is something that we've had to work through as well, because we're in a situation like I assume most everyone else, where we make different amounts of money between the two of us. In this case, Heather makes more than I do. And so this is something that we've had to have conversations about. We have to make decisions about. And it's just part of our financial life. And now I understand it's going to look different for couples in which one spouse maybe doesn't work at all. It's going to be a different story. We get that. And we might not be able to speak perfectly to that here today, but we still believe we can offer some perspective on different income levels and what that means for a marriage.
Yeah. And it's kind of a funny story. So I was reading this article, and it said in here that, 54% of men and 57% of women say they want a partner who provides financial security over love. So more than half of the people want that. And I remember when I was single and I was working in public accounting and I was meeting with my manager, and they had asked me about hey, what is your long term? What is your 5-year goal? And I said, my goal is to marry rich and quit.
And you were serious.
I was like, that's what I want to do. I'm in this profession. I'm meeting a lot of men, making a lot of money. That is my 5-year plan. That 5-year plan did not work out very well.
What are you saying about my income
I
level?
was in the less than 50% where I actually chose love.
So you're saying
Not that I don't have financial security. I chose both.
you're saying I didn't do very good career-wise for
I
you.
chose both.
Good to hear. Good to know. Yeah. No, I mean I get it. I get it. But yeah, I think that's important is that when you have to identify what's important to you, and I think it is kind of surprising that most people would say would choose money over love or assume that the love will follow, and it's harder to find someone that makes money, which is kind of interesting. But I think the point is that I think our situation is very normal, and I think that it's like we said, it's just increasingly more common that wives will make more than their husbands, and this is something that traditionally has been challenging for husbands to work through because I think it's something, and it's honestly, I probably haven't had as big of a time with it as a lot of guys would, but I do want to feel like I contribute, and so I think that the big thing, at least from a male perspective here, the reason that this is such an issue is that traditionally men are the providers, and our value comes from what are we bringing to the table a lot of times, and if we're not able to bring the majority of the table, then we might feel like we've failed as providers. Now, me, like I would feel like I'd failed if I'm not bringing something to the table. Like I feel like I would really struggle if I wasn't working at all. Now, I'm bringing something, so I feel like I'm not struggling quite as much as a lot of guys would. Right,
but then I think that's a really good segue into what we wanted to talk about with what are the issues that arise.
Yes.
And I think that's a big one, right? Is the guilt, like wanting to provide. And I think, you said it as men that they want to feel like they're contributing. And so to your point, as long as you're contributing. But like we talked about in the intro, like some men are now staying home with their kids and raising the family. And I think that's
contributing.
Really great. Exactly.
To what I was saying earlier, that is contributing. Yes.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the biggest issues in this, and neither of us can really relate to that because both of us are working. But I know for a lot of people out there who do stay at home, there is often guilt that they have. And I'm not saying that's right, but that becomes the issue, is that there's maybe potentially guilt about not working, even though, to your point, they're contributing and probably arguably contributing even more by doing a lot of the work around the home and raising children. But
yeah, and I have guilt today oftentimes about spending money on myself, and I'm working. And so I can only imagine that, like, if I was spending money on myself and I wasn't working, I would feel even more guilt. And I know that's the saver side of me coming out, and maybe it's a little excessive to feel that guilt. I get it. That's we all have our issues to work through, and that's mine. But yeah, I can definitely relate to this one.
Right. Another issue that's really common is resentment. And this is kind of usually with the spouse that's making more money, will sometimes resent the other spouse. And I would say I struggled with this, not so much about the income disparity. It wasn't because of the income disparity. It was about, I struggled, like when I was single, I made my own money. I did what I wanted. And I resented more when we got married, having to answer to someone and not be able to do what I want. I felt like I work hard, I make good money, I want to be able to control it. But I realized now that was super selfish, and I was wanting to do what I wanted and not what we wanted, and we weren't on the same page. And so I think that's where that resentment came from. It wasn't that, hey, I make more money, I should be able to do it. It was more, I make money and I've been able to control it and be in power of it. And I resent you now for trying to control what I'm doing with it.
And I think that's a big growing point in marriages in general. And yes, it probably comes out most on the money side. But when you have to, just in a marriage, you have to be in community. You have to be one with someone else. You have to let someone else be able to help make decisions in your life in marriage. That's a big step. That's a big sacrifice. And so, yeah, totally get that one. The third issue that we see come up is around power struggles, and how the person that makes the money is like, yep, I can do what I want with it because I make the money. And I know I saw that at times in like my parents' marriage, where they would like my dad might want to purchase purchase a toy. He was into some model airplanes, or he was really excited about a boat, and yep, he wanted to do that, and so he got to do that. But it was like, okay, are we doing that? Are we having a conversation together about that? And I think there's something to be said from seeing that, and the lesson that you take away from what you see, maybe from your parents, from what they did well, or what they may have had room for improvement in, that we can learn from.
Yeah, I mean, whether you want to admit it or not, power, we equate power and money together. So if you have money, it equals power. You have power over people, or you feel like you do, right? And so I think that's where this one comes into. And I would agree. I mean, I saw it. It wasn't necessarily, I feel like, a power struggle. But I mean, to your point, I think you see a lot in your family. Like, I remember growing up, and about just differences in what my parents wanted to do with the money. And I think that's more what it came down to. It wasn't a power struggle, but because everybody has different desires. I mean, even if you're a saver, even if you're David Prowl, who's a super saver, you're saving for something. You have a desire there, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just, if you're on different pages, like I remember, my mom would want to save up so we could go on a family vacation and take that week together as a family and go somewhere and spend that time together. And my dad I don't know that was always a priority.
Sure.
He was a workaholic. He wanted to work more. I don't think that was a value. But then all of a sudden my dad would come home with a new car without like talking to anybody. And it was just like, what? Like, we can afford a new car, but we couldn't like go on this little trip as a family. So I think it goes back to, again, what your desires are. And then again, whether you are the one that has the power or the money, you feel like sometimes you have the power to make that decision.
Yeah. It's about the priorities and who has the power to set those priorities. And oftentimes if you're making more money, you feel like, oh, I have the power to make that decision because I'm making the money. Yeah. And then of course, this power dynamic can often lead then to lying about money, right? Because if you feel like you're lacking the power, if you have power, you probably don't feel like you need to lie about money, because you're like, no, I have the right to do this because it's my money. But if you feel like you're the one that doesn't necessarily have the power to make those decisions, then you feel like you have to operate under the radar. You have to do things subvertly. You might have to lie about where money is going. And this kind of gets back to our transparency episode from a few episodes back. And you get into some bad behavior there.
Yeah. And especially, again, like to your point, I think it comes down to, a lot of times I remember growing up, my mom stayed at home. She worked part-time and my dad worked, right? But a lot of times the person staying home is the one's doing most of the spending.
Yes.
Because they're the one taking care of the kids. So they're going to the grocery store. They're the ones going to Target. They're the ones buying school supplies and buying clothes for the kids, taking them to doctor's appointments. And so I know that can kind of feel like, oh gosh, all I did today was run errands and spend all this money. And that might upset the spouse. So I know sometimes you might feel like I need to hide that, or even though it's things that you may have even agreed upon, and obviously important things. It's not even, special or splurges. It's just you're the one that's spending the money on the thing because you have the time and the availability. But again, as long as you have a plan, you're on the same page, it's not a reason to hide it or feel like you should have to hide it, right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And then, all these things can all lead to divorce. Like, you can, if you're fighting all these issues, if you're having these disagreements, these are all disagreements that pile on to likely other money disagreements that you have, and that ultimately heads you down a bad road. And that's what makes communication about these so critical, is that none of us want to end up in the divorce area. And so let's steer clear of there as best as possible to make sure we're aligned on our priorities, on our decisions, where we need to be going in order to hit our goals.
Yeah, I mean, just to be clear, income inequality or income disparity alone does not cause divorce,
not
right?
At all. It's because we all have it.
Yeah, everybody has that. It's combined with these other issues that we're talking about. It might lead to lying or hiding, or you're feeling guilt or resentment, or all these other issues that we talked about. Those can like boil up to create okay, this is causing a big problem that we didn't talk about, we didn't deal with it, and so it can ultimately, right, lead to divorce. So that's why we feel so passionate about this podcast, is that money issues are a really significant cause of divorce, and there's really no reason, because there's a lot of ways to work around it, and so we really want to make sure people don't end up in that
right.
camp.
And we started this. You recall we said, hey, at the beginning of this episode, we said this is normal. This is all normal. And so this is normal tension that everyone experiences to a certain extent or another. And so it's just, granted, some more than others, but everyone has this at some level. So we need to handle this appropriately. And what is the right way to handle this and address it? Well, first, as I already mentioned, great communication.
Wait, what's that word?
Communication. Let's talk to each other.
Have we ever mentioned communication on this podcast? I feel like that is like a new idea.
Yeah, it seems to come up in every single episode. And I know it's like we are just a broken record on this communication train. And, there's so many different ways to communicate, and there's so many ways to do it right, and there's a lot of ways to do it wrong. And we don't have time to get into a lot of detail here, but I think, you stay talking to each other. Always be talking to each other about what's happening here.
Right. I mean, again, you guys signed up for this partnership. You're on the team. You're in this team together, and you are on the same team. So you shouldn't be treating things like a competition or a battle. Like, you need to be working together. And the only way you're going to do that is to get on the same page and know you're on the same page, and is through communication.
And when we started communicating specifically about income disparity, one of the things that we needed to do, Heather, was we needed to say which one of our careers needs to take a front seat when we have to make a decision, and which takes a back seat.
Yeah.
Which do we need to make the priority? And ultimately, looking at our two careers, we said, it looks like Heather's career probably has bigger legs. And so we're going to make that bet, early on in our marriage, that this is where the priority is going to be. And so that's where it's been for pretty much the entirety of our marriage. Maybe it was a couple of years in that we finally had to say, we need to make a call on whose career we're focusing on. But we had to have those conversations, because otherwise, if we didn't, then we'd be bickering back and forth about, well, we got to make this move for my career, or that one for your career, or our careers would conflict otherwise.
Yeah, exactly. We really learned we had to make a choice, and we had to make a decision. And it's not that the other one's career wasn't important, but when it came down to making decisions and we had a choice to make, we had already talked about it and we knew where we were going to prioritize. And the other thing is it's not that couldn't change. That's a topic that you can revisit. It doesn't have to say like, well, since we decided that when we first got married, Heather's career is going to be the focus. That doesn't mean that can't change down the road. And that conversation needs to keep coming up and making sure that is still the plan and where you still want to prioritize.
And certainly as career options have come up for you, we've had that conversation again. And we've had to say, is how much of a negative impact would this career move have on my career?
Right.
And is it worth it?
Right.
And so it's always weighing the pros and cons across the family, rather than just across, if it's good for your career but it kills my career, it's probably not worth doing.
Right.
But
I remember when I was at work and got told about the opportunity for Singapore. I was completely shocked. I didn't know it was coming. It was complete, like, out of left field. And I remember coming home that night, and I obviously had kind of told David, shared over text or whatever, but hadn't gotten into the details. And I was fully prepared that I was going to have to say no to it, even though I really wanted it, because I was just like, I don't know how this is going to work for him. And even though we're prioritizing me, like, it still needs to work for you as well, right? And I
Right.
remember coming home and you being like, I want to make this work. If we can make this work, I want to do whatever I can. And I was just like blown away. And we were able to. But again, it it had to work for you, right? And we were able to make it work for you.
Right. Yeah, and that wouldn't have happened if we weren't in constant communication about these things. So
Right.
I think that's really the big lesson here. At least that's why it's number one on my list here. Secondly, also another great way to stay communicating is through general good money management practices. And I would say number one in that list of money management practices would be looking at your budget, having that monthly or whatever that regular budget discussion and those money conversations to say, where are we going? What are we doing? Is it in line with our goals? And it reemphasizes the fact that this isn't my money, this isn't your money, this is our money that we're planfully working around. And so it takes some of that. It takes some of that back and forth, or that ownership of this is mine, I get to do whatever I want with it, out of it.
Yeah, and if you are a little unsure of what good money management looks like, I would suggest this awesome podcast called Marriage and Money that you're listening to right now. We've got a lot of other episodes that you can go back and listen to help guide the path.
We've got some great episodes on budgeting even.
That's right. To add on to the good money management, I think another huge area is having shared goals. It really, really starts there. And I think that is super key to having a successful money management in your marriage. You really need to be on the same page and working towards the same thing. When you think about it, when you're at work, or if you were when you were at school and you were working on a project together, it didn't really matter who did what or who spent how much time or effort. It was the team effort to reach the goal and complete it. Everybody worked together. Everybody had their place. You knew what you were working towards and you succeeded. And that's how you really need to be working as a couple. Agreement, aligning on what you're working towards, and you're on the same team. You're working towards the same thing.
What happens if one of the people on your team is the person that just kind of sits in the corner and coasts along and hopefully gets the same A you do?
You may have chosen poorly in marriage. No, I'm just kidding.
No, I mean, hopefully that's not the case for anyone, right? I mean, ideally, the thought is that you picked a spouse that is in this with you and wants to succeed as badly as you do. I would say, like, if you're in that situation, though, this is where you need to have conversations to get inspired together on what you're working towards. There's got to be something in there. There's got to be a goal that your spouse is just as, or if not more, excited to reach than you are. And so I would say in that situation, it's probably more an issue of you haven't found a common goal that person's excited about yet than anything else. That's at least that's my initial thought.
Yeah, and I think the other thing on that, though, is you should think about having equal amounts of work in your family. Mm-hmm. So,
Yep.
It doesn't mean that, if I did this chore, you do this chore. I think you need to figure out what that balance looks like. But I agree with you. Like, that feels really crappy if one person is doing everything. If they're working full time, they're taking care of the house, they're doing everything, and the other spouse is just working or something. You know what I mean? Like, you need to make sure that you both feel, back to your point at the very beginning, that you're both contributing, not just financially, but contributing to the marriage, and that you do feel that it's equally spread across your partnership.
Yes. Yeah. And I think ultimately this gets down to a mindset shift, right? It's you want to have that shared, you want to each be contributing equally. It might be differently, but equally, but you also want this mindset shift of it's not my money, it's our money. You don't want this mindset of I'm the one making all the money, so I make all the decisions, or you're the one who makes all the money, and so I guess I can't say anything about it. No, this is a couple. You're in this as a couple. You're in this as a married couple. You need to shift that mindset so that you are comfortable having these conversations together.
Yeah, I totally agree. Again, I just keep going back to the concept of a team because I think it works so perfect here. You are married. You are part of a team. How do teams work? They plan together. They strategize. They practice together. They play the game. They win. They lose. They get rewarded. They do all of that together. And so you and your spouse need to be working together through all of this. All of these issues, communicating, setting your goals, being on the same page. I'm on Team Prail, and I'm super proud to be part of Team Prail.
I'm happy to be on Team Prail as well.
It might have been a little better if it was Team Williams, my maiden name, because it was a lot easier to spell and pronounce, but that's okay. Made the decision. Team Prail. Team Prail for the win.
For the win.
All right, so we want you to continue this discussion with your spouse. So sit down. Again, is this something that you've ever thought about? I'm guessing yes, probably a million times. Do you know, ask your spouse that. Ask them, have they thought about it? Maybe you haven't actually talked about it, but you've both just internalized it. So talk about, what do you think or feel about this topic? Have you guys spoken about it? Do you know if this is an issue in a marriage? Maybe this is kind of what's coming out. You didn't even realize this was the underlying reason. So have the conversation. Make sure that you guys are on the same page. And if you're not, get on the same page on this topic. So David, obviously we spent a lot of time talking about this tonight or on this podcast. So what would you say are the advantages of having different levels of income?
Well, I think one of the biggest advantage is that it helps you, it forces you to make some certain decisions. So we talked a little bit about having to prioritize your career over mine. And I think that's been really helpful in that it removes a lot of the question then around what should we do when we each have potentially conflicting but good career opportunities. Like, we know the answer then. It simplifies things. It also helps us, I think, define roles a little bit more clearly, right? So you talked about shared work, and shared but maybe not necessarily equal. So it could be one person needs to work more hours. You need to work nights, days and nights, or you need to do whatever. You have to do some items that require the other person to pick up a few more chores around the house. I think those roles then help to get defined a little bit easier when you're both aligned on where the priorities are based on that income disparity. So I think if you're having those conversations, a lot of the issues that other spouses might have to argue about, you're not arguing about because they've ended up having to sort themselves out here. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's really good. You're really good. I love when things are simple. It's a great point.
You like simple. What do you think are some of the advantages?
Well, I think having different income levels makes budgeting more complex, which is more fun for me when I'm working in Excel. No, I'm just kidding.
You like complex budgets. You like the difficult numbers.
I like a little challenge when I'm working in good Excel.
Of course.
No, honestly, for me, I just thought it was a bonus getting married and having two incomes. For me, it meant more income with one set of living expenses. Was like, we are gonna win.
It's all about the money, huh?
But what I think is something that's fun that you and I have tried to do has been to try to live on one income. So even though we've got two incomes, let's try it, because who knows what the situation would happen, if things would change. And so we've tried to, and we started with the higher one, and we said, okay, we're going to live on the higher income and try to save the lower one. And since then, we've tried to swap it and say, okay, now let's try to live on the lower income and save the higher income. And I think we wouldn't have thought to do that if we'd both made the same amount. So I think it can help you become more aggressive in your goals just by maybe trying that little challenge.
You're
Maybe
saying
something fun for you and your spouse to talk about.
you become a better saver as a result of this.
Exactly.
I like the sound of that. Yeah, very good. Good. Awesome. Well, wonderful. I think that about wraps up our conversation for today. Thank you so much, Heather, for a wonderful discussion. But we would love to continue to hear how your conversations about money have gone or to take your questions on a future episode. Please go ahead and email us at marriageandmoneypodcast@gmail.com or message us on Instagram at marriage.and.money. Also, continue to rate and review us on iTunes as that continues to help us reach more people. Thanks again for joining us this week, and remember that whether you are a spender or a saver, your best financial life lies somewhere in